All right, we're recording our classic start to every single episode. All right, everybody, welcome back to another episode. I feel like it's been a while since we did one. I guess it's only been 2 weeks, but this is the first time I've been back at home in like a few episodes. So it's nice, comfortable. Got a glass of whiskey. It's great. Anyway, if you're new to this podcast, which I'm hoping by now you're not. But if you are, make sure that you follow, subscribe, do all that good stuff. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about what we do here. We're a bunch of scientists. We talk about the science, and we try to help you guys become better hunters, fishermen, and hopefully offer a little bit of insight into the management of our wildlife and fish so that you have a better understanding of how all that stuff works. And today, we're going to be talking about some fish once again. This time, we're going to be diving into red snapper. Red snapper are a really popular recreational fishery, but also a commercial fishery in both the Gulf Coast, I guess Gulf of America. I think we're supposed to say that now, the Gulf of America, but also on the East Coast. There's always a lot of people that are sort of fired up about red snapper and the way that they're managed. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in a second, but first, I want to talk about just like a couple of really exciting things in conservation right now. The first, if you're down in Florida, you may have heard, probably around last week, we discovered that the Florida Department of Environmental Protection, which is kind of funny because they're not trying to protect anything apparently, but they were flirting with a deal with a developer called Upland LLC, and looking at the potential to trade away 600 acres of our public land for 3,000 acres of other land. And while that might seem like a good deal at first, when you sort of analyze what they were trying to trade away, that 600-acre parcel was much higher quality, higher value in terms of the ecology that's there compared to those other pieces. And once people figured this out, people banded together and spoke up. It was hunters, non-hunters, anti-hunters, just everybody that cares about nature. Everybody made a big stink about it, and within just like 5 days, we got the deal shut down. The developer withdrew their application or their proposal for the trade. So that's win number one. That
Heck
was
yeah.
awesome. What?
I, I was there at the protest last weekend. We were
Oh,
up there
were you
for, yeah, Nat and her sister even drove up. I was up there for a conference. Coincidentally, my parents live there. So we got
really?
to see it was great. The turnout was strong. It was fun talking with people. It was cool, uplifting thing to see everyone come together for.
Yeah, and and that's kind of been my message to everybody right now. It's, that was one thing, but there's a couple other things here that we can celebrate. But it's just really awesome to see what happens when we get on the same page and come together.
Mhm.
There's always going to be some like differences of opinion of how we achieve what we want to achieve, but at the end of the day, what we all want is to see nature thrive and to conserve that nature. And when things like this come up, we all get together, and we're a force to be reckoned with when we put our minds to it and we get on the same page. So that was super exciting. The other super exciting thing is the Florida bear hunt. You guys have heard me talk about this a ton on this podcast. We've been working up to the commission meeting that just finished today. Yesterday, we were talking about the bears. The bear hunt proposal was presented to the commission, and after a lot of heated comments from both sides, they voted 4-1 in favor of the proposal. So we're not done. Just have to say that very clearly. It's not over because there's still a final vote in August. And honestly, that one might be even more important because now the opposition is going to realize that this is like their last chance. So they're probably going to show up even bigger than they did this time. But it was really cool to see all the hunters come together, and again, fight for the for you know appropriate conservation management methods, and it was awesome. So win number two, and then win number three. I know this is taking forever. Sorry, guys. But
Before we move on, where's the next Bear Commission meeting going to be? Do
good question. The next commission meeting is going to be. It's not in Tallahassee. It's close to Tallahassee. They said the name of the town. I want to say it was Savannah, Florida, which is like real close to Tallahassee. They'll have all the details. They'll go up on the FWC website, but they're not there yet. And I believe they said it's going to be August 13, 14, which is right smack dab in the middle of my South Florida archery season. So I'm not thrilled about it, but this is important. Yeah, August 13, 14. So hopefully people can come out to that. Maybe Cody will actually come this time. Maybe.
I, my August is pretty open. Other
I'm
than
not holding it against
nearing
you.
towards, I want to go. I've been
I
to
get
some
it.
fisheries
People
ones.
have jobs is fine. Some people just don't care about nature as much as others.
I'm just trying to defend and get a job.
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair. But you don't have one yet, so you might as well go. And honestly, I mean,
True.
there's a ton of
True
people to
though.
meet there that like might give you a job. So, um,
Yeah, this job market is looking bleak for
well,
us
and I,
environmentalists.
I'm not like trying to like sell you on this or anything, but I've met a lot of the people there and have a few connections. I might be able to introduce you to some. In fact, I was having a conversation with like the administrator of like marine fisheries today. Um, so maybe he's got a job for you. I don't know. Anyway, um,
That'd be sweet.
Win
Try to
three.
make it up.
what win number three? So we're going to the federal level now. So this applies to everybody. Um, the budget reconciliation bill for 2026. You guys may have heard of this bill called the what is it? The big beautiful
One big beautiful
one
bill.
big beautiful bill. It's not very beautiful. There's a lot of things that are not. They're pretty ugly. But one of the things that really caught conservationists' attention was that there was 500,000 acres of public land, federal public land, BLM lands, in Utah and Nevada that were basically on the chopping block to be sold off to generate funding to sort of reconcile the budget, which is absolutely ridiculous because you know the budget is always in deficit, and if you're increasing the budget by selling off public land, the only way to maintain that budget in the future is to sell off more public land. So people kind of lost their minds over it. BHA stepped up big time, put a lot of money into a social media campaign, and thousands of people started calling the Capitol switchboard to tell their senators, their representatives to vote against any type of sale of public lands. And then we find out that actually it's not 500,000 acres. It was actually 1.5 million acres. Leave it to a politician to lie. But anyway, after pushing that really hard, they stripped that item off of the bill. So that's a huge win for public lands. And Matt, you were talking about some other things that were on there that we should be concerned about, Sea Grant and some other things. You want to elaborate on those?
Yeah, so a lot of the federal organizations that support conservation research are on the chopping block in this proposal or in this budget. And so one example of that is a lot of NOAA and NOAA fisheries would kind of get dissolved. Part of it would go to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but there's already NOAA's already getting hit really hard by staff cuts, cuts to programs, cuts to research, and they also fund a lot of research. Actually, the project that we're talking about today, or the paper that we're talking about today, all of this research was funded by NOAA grants, and so projects, including this one that we're going to be talking about, would not exist if the cuts that are proposed in this budget do get approved. Similarly, the U.S. Geological Survey, it's a really important research branch of the government. They do a lot of fisheries work. They do a lot of wildlife work. Really important stuff to help fill in some of the gaps that the states can't do on their own. Especially, like we're talking about fisheries here. a lot of this stuff it crosses state jurisdictions, that you can't have a single state manage these things. Same thing for a lot of wildlife. If wildlife is crossing boundaries, you can't rely on states alone kind of manage these things. So you have these federal organizations that help with that. And so the U.S. Geological Survey has an ecosystems mission area, and that entire area is proposed to get cut. So that would include things like, if you're
No, no,
familiar
no,
with.
no, no. Not the entire area, just 85% of it.
Are you sure it's only 85%? Well, either way, it's.
I'm pretty sure because I had a conversation with a friend of mine who's doing her PhD at UF. In fact, we talked about one of her papers, the bear paper that we discussed. It's one of the co-authors on that, and her advisor is at USGS, and he's getting cut,
Mhm.
and her funding's getting cut. Pretty much all of the ecological stuff that USGS does, whether it's fish, terrestrial, whatever, is getting cut, and the only thing that's going to be left is just going to be like a skeleton crew that's really not going to be capable of doing anything.
Mhm.
So
Yes, like what you were talking about there, those are the cooperative units.
yeah,
And so the cooperative units are great because they're, in some ways, the most direct and efficient sources of federal research for wildlife and conservation. The way it works is it's a cooperative among the federal government, university, and the state government agencies. The university provides the housing, the facilities for the researcher. The federal government provides kind of the position, the salary, and then the state provides funding and kind of the research questions. So you have a federal employee that's specifically doing research for that state, whether it be terrestrial, and they're usually, each office has a wildlife, like a terrestrial, and a fisheries component. So they're covering everything. And these are labs that have multiple students. They have, if you're familiar with, like, postdocs. And fortunately for the students, because they're a student of the university, that they're not going to lose. Like, they're still going to be a student, but like Mark, you just said, like, their advisor, the person that they're depending on, that they're learning from, their advisor, who might have been in that position for 20 years, they're going to lose their job. Postdocs are going to
yeah,
lose their jobs because their funding gets cut. And so this is really affecting a lot of people. And I was just at a meeting last week, and that everyone's talking about this. And so it's, these organizations are already experiencing some pretty incredible and devastating cuts, like you said, where, to the point that a lot of them can't even function. You go to conferences and attendance is at half because there's no federal employees.
yeah.
Um,
I
and
mean, I
so
guess we can kind of hope that they'll they'll realize they can't do much with what's left and start hiring people back. Hopefully, the same people that they fired, but we really have no idea what's going to happen.
Yeah, and you have to wait until the federal hiring freeze lifts for that to
Yeah.
happen. Um, but
But I don't want to only focus on the doom and gloom. Like, I think it's really important to celebrate the win of getting that public land sale
oh
taken
yeah,
off. And that's definitely awesome. But there's a lot of really crappy stuff on this bill. And so I don't want people to get this impression like, yay, we won. Like, no, we still have to push back. We still got to fight.
Mhm.
But at least, for the time being, as far as I know, this bill was passed, right?
So it was passed
Oh,
by
it's going to the Senate now.
the House. Now it goes to the
Oh,
Senate,
now,
and
yeah.
yeah,
So it passed the House, yeah. So, I mean, we can still push back. You can call that Capitol switchboard and reach out to your senators and tell them to strip any of the language in there that removes funding from USGS and NOAA and things like that. Um, and I think I know the phone number. No, I don't remember. It's something 2243121, but I can't remember the first three. We'll put it down in the description. Just call it. Honestly, like, it might seem like it's kind of a like daunting thing to like call the Capitol. It's really not that big of a deal. You literally call. You don't even have to know who your senator is. You just call up, and then it'll say, "Who do you want to connect with?" And then you just go, "I don't know." And then they're like, "Where do you live?" And then you tell them, and then they're like, "Your senators are these people." And then just call them. You either leave a message or somebody will answer. You give them your message and just tell them we don't want you guys to vote yes on anything that's going to strip away funding for USGS, NOAA, or any other agency that's doing ecological research. I think that's a pretty good blanket statement to put out there.
And I'll just add on top of that, like these aren't programs that we're just supporting because we're scientists. These are programs that for decades have had bipartisan support because they help everyone, and they're beneficial for the economy. A lot of the services that these organizations provide have like positive returns on investment. I think I saw something like Sea Grant has a 5-to-1 return on investment. So for every dollar it spends, it gets $5 in returns.
Yeah.
Fisheries is a important business. There's a lot of people that depend on it, and without these organizations, a lot of the services that these ecosystems provide are.
Well, I think to put it into like terms that maybe our audience can like really relate to is like, we talk about wildlife and fish and stuff. And so like the paper we're going to talk about today, like you said, it's funded by NOAA, and this paper is looking into different management tools that can be used and how effective they are in allowing that stock to grow. And by using these types of studies, we can allow that resource, that fishery, to recover, so that in the future we might be able to take more advantage of it. Because the issue that people have is like right now they're really being limited on how many snapper they're allowed to keep. Same thing goes for the bears. This girl that I'm talking about, as I understand it, and she might correct me on this, but as I understand it, she might be the PhD student that's supposed to be doing the analysis to estimate the new bear population, which is supposed to be published in like, I don't know, 2027 or whatever. Those numbers are going to be needed for us to update the bear quota. Right now, we have a bear quota that's based on numbers from back in 2015. If this hunt even happens, but we don't get to update those numbers unless we have this research. So, it really has a direct impact on the resources that we all, love and depend on.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that was depressing. Thanks for listening.
We're going to go and crawl into a corner and cry.
Yeah.
No, but again, like there are some wins happening, and I was talking to somebody about this today. Like, it's like, well, I don't really think we can call this a win because we just fought to keep something we already had that was being taken away. But the reality is that's conservation in general, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
conservation is all about conserving things that we have. We don't want them to change. And so the wins are basically every time somebody takes it away, like we stop them. So I still think we consider these wins. People are always going to be trying to take these things away, especially the people that don't understand the value of these natural resources. So anyway, trying to transition out of this on a positive note. These are wins, guys. Let's get together. Um, anyway, so snappers. Let's talk about snappers.
Let's do it.
So as I kind of mentioned, the reason we wanted to talk about snappers is one, it was discussed at the commission meeting today. They sort of gave an update on regulations. They announced that the Gulf season this year is going to be one of the longest in a very long time. I don't remember what amount of time they said, but it's going to be 126 days, which is a really long season. But it's always been the case that the Gulf snapper population is, in way better shape than the Atlantic snapper population. And I think in part, and I'm not really 100% sure about this, but I think a large reason for that is that the Gulf tends to be much shallower. There's a really wide shelf, and so we don't get much barotrauma. Whereas on the East Coast, it doesn't take long for you to be in 1,000 feet of water. Not that you're typically catching them in 1,000 feet, but it gets deep really quickly, and so I think fish are more prone to barotraumas.
So
Mhm.
just quickly for any listeners that aren't familiar with barotrauma, um, so this is what happens. Baro being like pressure, and trauma obviously being
Mm-hmm.
trauma. So when you catch fish from, really, it can only, even could be as shallow as Sometimes for some species, the shallow is like 30 feet. When you
Yeah.
bring them up, that's a lot of pressure that's being relieved from them. And so their insides have this opportunity to expand. And fish have what's called a swim bladder. It's this air sac that's in their body cavity. And when that expands, if they're not able to expel that gas, it can cause a lot of stress to them. And the only way, I guess there's a couple ways to relieve that stress. One is to expel the gas. So if you like puncture that swim bladder, if you can, but sometimes that requires you poking a hole into the side of the fish. You might miss. It can be kind of sketchy. The other thing you can
I
do,
think that's kind of the old school way. Like people aren't really doing that anymore.
you'd be
There's
surprised.
Well,
still, yeah,
people still do it, but it's not really the accepted method. Like we know that still
yeah,
has really high, mortality rates
risk
when you do that.
factor leads to mortality. Yeah,
So I've seen like state agencies that are using that to release some fish in freshwater. Um,
What
so
kind of
it's
fish?
lake trout.
Oh well,
I
I
mean,
mean,
it's
I guess it depends on the fish too, like how
yeah.
hardy they are, and I would argue that in colder water, maybe it's not as bad because their metabolisms are going to be slower, and bacteria are probably going to grow slower on a wound. So
Mhm.
maybe they're able. I don't know. I'm just pulling this out of my ass, like to be honest, like I don't know if you do that over here in these warm waters. I mean, there's a lot of studies that have been done that show that like their mortality rates can still be really high. I mean,
Yeah,
they're better than if you just let them float around on the surface, obviously.
well, that's the thing is sometimes you poke them and then they still float around because you didn't do it right. But anyways,
Mhm.
so that's obviously not the ideal way to do it. The other thing that you can do is you get the fish back to a high pressure environment, which basically just means get it back down to depth, get it back down to a deeper habitat. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that in the paper, but just wanted to let folks know what that barotrauma is and why it's
Just
an
a,
issue. Because yeah, if these fish have that, basically think of it as having a additional balloon that they're attached to when they're at the surface, and they can't swim down to get down below, and so you have really high mortality associated with
well,
that.
but also it's not just the air that's in that swim bladder. That's the most visible thing because you see that like stomach get pushed out of their mouth a lot of
Mm-hmm.
times, and their eyes are bulging out and they're all sort of bloated and stuff. But realistically, the gases in their blood are embolizing as well. This is the exact
Mm-hmm.
same thing that happens when humans go scuba dive and then come up too fast and they have the bends. The gases in your blood expand, they turn into bubbles, they can block off the blood flow to like your extremities and stuff. It can cause all kinds of problems. Sometimes it's not that big of a deal, and sometimes you freaking die. You know.
it blocks off to your brain.
Yeah, exactly. So, and we do the same thing with humans. We put them in a pressure chamber and bring that pressure back down. But obviously, we're not going to do that to a fish. It's probably it's just way easier to just send them right back down to the depth where they were at, and then hopefully, you didn't cause too much damage and they'll be fine. But
Yeah,
a
venting
lot of times
humans doesn't work very well.
they're not.
Venting humans, like
Yeah,
poking our swim bladders.
just like, oh, you came up too fast while scuba diving. Here you go. Stab in the chest.
Like Pulp
Um,
Fiction.
yeah.
All
So
right.
anyway, we're going on a tangent here, but anyway, the Gulf population, has always had these like longer. Apparently, my dogs just realized there's something outside. Anyway, we've had these longer seasons on the Gulf Coast, but on the East Coast, sometimes seasons are like just a couple of days. You know, I apologize for the dogs. Nothing I can do about it. Unless I
And we're talking state seasons, right?
Yes, yeah, we're talking about Florida here. On the East Coast, the seasons are very short. They can range from like just 2 days to like, a little over a week. I think it's been a while since we had 2 weeks. And a lot of times, like, I think there's even been some that have just been one day. Where people go out and they're allowed like one fish. They just pull up their one fish per boat. Like you literally get one snapper per person on the boat. They'll go out with a bunch of people and pull in a snapper each, and then that's it. They're done. You know. So there's been a lot of anger from the fishing community about this. Like, why are these seasons so short? And I think a lot of people don't understand sort of the way that the stock assessments are being done, but also how those mortality rates are being factored in with the models. And so that was kind of the point of this. We're going to talk about some of the things that are being considered when they come up with those season dates and bag limits, and hopefully give you guys a little bit more insight to how they do that. So yeah, you guys want to dive in?
I
Sure.
That
like
was
it.
a really long intro. That was a 25-minute intro. So now we only have 35 minutes to tell them about spread snapper. Talk fast.
Well, I
Go.
guess, did we talk about bag limit of two? And then, like, I'm not that familiar with the red snapper fishery before we move on. Um, but there's bag limit of two per person, it looks like. And then it's 16-inch minimum on the Gulf right now,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe 20 on the Atlantic
Wasn't it
side.
20? Was it 20 or 24?
I'm seeing 20 on my app. My app
It might
also
be 20.
says, okay.
I know the
Yeah.
paper they look at a 24-inch one, so I'm guessing 20 is the current.
Oh, yeah, that's what it was. Yeah. So, and just to give a little bit of context, like so they've kind of changed these regulations throughout the years, and so they're trying to figure out, what approaches are the most effective at allowing this resource to sort of restore itself because they've been overfished for so long.
Yeah, what
Um,
they say is it's been overfished. The models are showing since like 2001 or something.
1998 was the first stock assessment that
1998.
showed it. Yeah.
yeah, which
That's
is kind
crazy.
of crazy that was the first stock assessment for such a popular commercial fishery. Um, and another thing that people are often really sort of mad about is that the commercial fishery gets a lot more leeway. Um, and the reason being that the commercial fishery uh, doesn't really have discard mortality because their approaches are far more targeted. They're typically just bringing in the species that they want, and they've just shown in the past that they just have a lot less discard mortality. So a lot of the fish on the recreational side of the quota, I guess it's not a real quota, but the sort of allowable landings, the recreational fishermen are filling those numbers outside of the season when they're out there catching grouper and stuff like that, and it's essentially accidentally killing fish. Anyway, I'm giving way too much away. Let's talk
Well,
about let's talk about the methods.
well, no,
What
I think
do
that's
you do?
it's still good background, right? Because it's so the like for me, I didn't realize how many fish are targeted out there. They said there's something like 55 different species. So you have
Yeah,
your snapper season, but then you catch this other stuff year round, and obviously bycatch is an important thing.
yeah,
And I think we talked about this on maybe our last podcast or one of the previous ones, where catch and release isn't always the same thing depending on how you release the
yeah.
fish. And so, like,
Especially when you're pulling them up from 300 feet down.
right,
Hmm.
yeah, and so, it, like we were talking before with that barotrauma, I saw they say the descender devices are required on board for anglers that are targeting fish in like the snapper grouper complex. Those are two
Yeah,
species that are really affected by that barotrauma. But I guess some surveys have shown that it's actually rarely used, and a lot of people aren't even aware of that requirement. So,
yeah.
um,
Well, and I
spread.
think a big problem too is like how do you prove what they're targeting? They're going out on a boat and they got fishing rods. Like, how are you going to tell them like, oh, you're targeting, groupers and snappers? All they have to say is, no, I wasn't. I just happened to catch a bunch. Like I was targeting some other species. So it's just something that's really hard to enforce.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And so I guess yeah. So kind of going into the methods. What this paper was then doing was looking to see if there are different management actions that can be made to help that snapper population in the future. And they did that by developing some spatial population models that were looking at both the snapper population and then that entire fishery. So you can think of the effects on the snapper population, the future snapper population, having two main driving components to it. There's the snapper population itself, then there's the fishery, so the way that the people interact with it. This paper used a whole bunch of data to evaluate each of those two components. So just to kind of briefly get into that, for the snapper population, they looked at things like snapper abundance based on area, also looked at things like the natural and the fishing mortality rates, and spawning potential. So, how many females are there? How large are those females? And then this is something like where you'd expect, natural mortality is going to decrease as fish get larger. So that's something that they can incorporate into their models. Or if you have more old, large females, you're going to have a higher number of spawners. You're going to have a greater production. So those are all things that they put into their models. And then they also look at things like the juvenile fish production. So they're considering age 1 fish. And they also think about where these juveniles are going to get produced. So a lot of research shows that most of the younger snappers are only in nearshore habitats. So they only focused in that nearshore habitat. And I mentioned that they also look at this based on area. So the snapper fishery, at least what they're looking at here, covers from the Carolinas, which they kind of have as one area, and then Georgia and northern Florida, and then a southern section that was just kind of South Florida. And each of those three sections then got split again to a nearshore and offshore zone that they separated about I think it was 100 feet, 35 meters around there.
Of depth, yeah.
So that's the population dynamics of the things. And then they also incorporated some stuff from recent stock assessments. Like we said, there have been 5 stock assessments since 1998, most recent one being 2021. And then they also have some environmental data provided by NOAA. Fisheries side of things, so you have things like how many fish are being captured, what's the effort of capture. All these things are, there's estimates that can be made available. So thinking about fishing effort in particular, they use programs like the Marine Recreational Information Program. So this is a program that's provided by NOAA, and it gives them information on the number of trips that people go on, and people list what species they capture. So they counted the number of trips where people actually caught, and this is recreational fishery, the number of fish that recreational anglers caught, and they use that as a metric of recreational fishing effort because they separated recreational fisheries from the commercial fisheries. For the commercial side of things, they use basically captain's logs to figure out how long are they out there, how long are they fishing, very quantifiable metric. And as long as the captain's being honest, it's an accurate metric. They also look into discard mortality. So Mark was talking about that before. There's estimates on that based on the most recent stock assessment. And these estimates are, sadly pretty high. So if you look at the recreational fishery, they also separated this with nearshore and offshore because, like Mark was saying, the deeper you catch a fish, the more effective it's going to be. Nearshore, 23% of fish that are released are having mortality. Offshore, it's only slightly higher, but still higher at 25%. Commercial fishery, it's actually worse. It's 32%. Now, they might not be discarding as much, but because these guys are on the move, they're trying to get stuff done. They're not really, they do care about the fish. They're not just hucking them. They still have some survival, but mortality estimates are 32% for nearshore. There isn't really good estimates for offshore, so they had to do some calculations, and they had 35% estimates for offshore mortality. So they're taking into account all these different things, fish mortality, catch rates, and then they're running all these different models to figure out, okay, what's the population, the snapper population look like with respect to the snapper themselves and the fishing pressure from both the commercial and recreational side. From there, they took 25 different management strategies to figure out what could this population look like in the future. And they broke down those strategies into 5 different categories. So they have gear modifications. So this is something like changing bait specifications, number and types of hooks that you can use. Basically just trying to reduce the probability that you're going to catch a fish. Because if you think about, fishing over time, we've gotten a lot better as humans at capturing fish. You've got improvements to sonar, you've got your forward-looking sonar, you've got all this different stuff. We're catching fish a lot better than we used to. So thinking about how can we actually scale that back a little, and how would that influence the snapper population. So you've got gear modifications, You've got discard mortality. So again, how can we decrease the effects of these fish dying after you release them? Really thinking about this with those descenders, those devices that get these fish back down to deep habitats, trying to increase the use of those. Size limits, like Mark was saying, trying to increase that size limit so you end up releasing more fish. Temporal regulations, so thinking about your seasons, changing the season lengths, so whether it be longer or shorter, and then spatial regulations. So similarly, but rather than looking at it from the perspective of time, thinking of it as a perspective of like where you are among those 6 regions. So 6 being north to south, and then nearshore and offshore. And then the last thing that they did was kind of a sensitivity analysis to look at how do these management actions actually address their goals of increasing the biomass and the abundance of snappers, decreasing their mortality rates, but also making sure that you're still having good angler catch rates and good angler experience. And the way that they did that was they ran these simulations for 200 years. So you have 100 years of just kind of like the current situation. So that way you get to like this stable situation. Then you have, after 100 years, you implement your management action. Then you have another 100 years in their simulations. And then they compare that endpoint to the kind of the initial endpoint. And they say, okay, what was the change in the change in the conditions, whether it was the fish conditions or the fishery conditions, the fish population, so like their abundance, number of spawners, or the fishery being catchability, landings, and such forth.
That was a good summary.
That really was. I was about to say the same thing. It's like it's really hard to explain modeling like these types of models to people who don't really get it. I thought you did a great job. Good job, buddy. Um, yeah, so I guess we can just kind of go right into the results because like I think there's a lot of points to sort of discuss here, especially considering that we're fishermen ourselves and understand the biology. I think there's some really interesting points to talk about, and I kind of have some thoughts about like some management strategies that I feel like they didn't really touch on that I think could be effective. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about them.
Yeah. All right. I'll do those broad kind of results. I don't think we've mentioned though some of the issues with just the life history that red snapper bring into the picture that kind of produce this overfishing
Spawning
scenario.
aggregations.
Well, yeah, that's a big one. They're long lived, but they're unique. Like the oldest snapper ever aged was 50 years old,
Holy
and
shit.
usually in those long lived species, they also mature really slowly. But that's not the case for red snapper. They mature by like 2 years of age. So we can have a really hard, it's hard to set those regulations with life history strategy like the red snapper have, and they aggregate like Mark said, and they're not the hardest fish in general to catch, and I think that's where a lot of anglers are like, we're catching so many, like the population's huge, we're catching a bunch every time we go out. Why are these seasons so
Well,
short?
and I think that's I hear that a lot. Like I hear this whole like, oh, we catch them all the time, we see them all the time. Like there's so many of them. Like why do we have these crazy regulations? Like the same thing was being said about Goliath grouper, and I mean we now have a very limited tag allocation for Goliath grouper, but it's really hard to explain to people that these are species that aggregate when they spawn. So and they aggregate in very sort of specific types of habitat. They're looking for, typically it's going to be some part of the reef that stands out or a wreck, that offers sort of like this structure. And a lot of times you'll find these aggregations just piled up on top of these structures. Well, guess what fishermen like to go fish over? Fucking structure. So like these fishermen are going out trying to catch things. There's a spawning aggregation happening at the exact spot that they want to fish at. And then they're surprised that every single fish they catch gets eaten by a Goliath grouper because there's 100 of them sitting below the boat, you know. But those fish aren't there all the time, and they kind of like migrate from all over the place to come to these spawning aggregation locations. So if you're there at the right time of year, it might seem like they're just everywhere because they are, but the rest of the year you'll barely ever see them. And I always try and tell people, I'm like, what do you think would happen if you just went and found a sandy bottom spot out there and fished there instead? Like, Well, we wouldn't catch any fish. Yeah, exactly. They wouldn't get eaten by Goliath groupers either, because nobody wants to be there. Like everything is congregated in these like specific spots, and I don't know. People kind of struggle to wrap their heads around that idea.
I think there's I don't know what to call it. There's an idea that we fish down the red snapper population. You generally are going to find smaller fish now.
Yeah,
But there's this idea that the larger fish aren't as tied to these, high relief structures on the bottom, and the larger fish will actually rove between. So you're more likely potentially to catch the larger adult fish, maybe that 50-year-old fish, in that sandy spot in between relief patches. But some other research is showing that might not actually be the case and might just be anecdotal. But
maybe the big
I've
fish
heard
are
that.
smart enough not to. They're like, well, last time I ate one of those, I got dragged up to the surface. My stomach came out of my mouth. I barely survived. I'm not freaking eating that again. You know?
Yeah, so there's other studies that are showing it's we've fished down the size in this population for sure.
But we're seeing that in so many different fish populations, though, because of the size limits that we put on fish.
Yeah,
As soon as they get over it, they get harvested, and then the fish that mature, um, at an earlier age, are sort of advantaged, and so we start seeing maturity happening at an earlier age, and just in general, the whole population starts sort of shrinking in overall size. Individual.
that's actually one of the interesting results that they found. Should I get into those?
Yeah, I was gonna
Yeah.
say we're
No,
getting off
sorry.
topic here.
Man, we're waiting. If you keep letting me find reasons to go
All
on
right.
tangents, I will.
So of those 25 models, 23 were shown to actually increase the red snapper population, especially when they included recreational fishing pressure reduction. These led to larger, more abundant red snapper. All right, with the descender devices, they obviously they can really help. Discard mortality with our recreational fisheries, as Matt mentioned, is a huge issue. The models that included increased use of those descender devices, I can't talk. Um, what did show that we'd see an increase in landings and larger fish. All right, now
Wait,
to
wait. I want to reiterate that real quick. So what you're saying is if people start using descender devices now and stay committed to it, that over the course of the next 100 years, like I mean, how fast do these effects like kick in? Like
Yeah.
over the
yeah,
like people don't want to wait 100 years; they're going to be dead by then. So like, are they going to start seeing bigger fish being landed within the next 10 to 15, 20 years? Because that might be a motivator for people
I
to start
mean,
using those
if you
devices.
if you think about not so much the size of the fish, because these fish, I'm guessing that they're growing pretty slowly. I don't know much about snapper, but if you think of each fish that you're being released having, say, a 50% increase of survival if you use one of these descenders, that means that you're now going to have 50% more fish next season, right? I mean, it's
Yeah, fifty
maybe
percent
not. You
of
have some
50% of the released
of
fish.
the released fish,
Or
yeah,
yeah,
but so it's
yeah,
still a huge increase in number of fish that are getting released. And if you're only allowed to keep a couple fish, most of these fish that are getting caught are getting released. It's this bycatch that's the big issue.
yeah.
Um, and so yeah, I think like when I saw that, I was like, yeah, that just makes sense. Like if you use these
mhm.
descenders, that's going to have an effect. One thing I didn't mention in the methods, they only looked at the descender devices for recreational fisheries because can you imagine some commercial fisheries? All right, guys, we got a snapper, we got to stop the process and use this descender to get this fish back down. It's not practical. They're not going to use it.
Yeah. But at the same time, if it's in season, they're not letting any of them go.
Yeah, that too.
Because I think the commercial guys, I don't think they have size limits on them, do they? Or maybe I didn't read that.
I I don't know. I'd have to
I
look
didn't
into
talk
that,
about
but
that.
still, I mean, I think it could be interesting to have the idea. You said earlier we're not putting fish in barotrauma chambers. It is possible you could
Maybe we
have
should.
chambers. What's that?
Maybe we should. Maybe
Well,
commercial fishermen should have
that's
like a chamber on the boat where they're like, well, we can keep
that's what I'm
operating, guys.
saying.
We can throw this fish in this chamber and keep fishing.
That's what I'm thinking. And then at the end, then you toss them all. I don't know. I
Or
don't know how
you
expensive that would be,
or you
but
just hire one guy whose entire job is just
Yeah,
descend.
more jobs. I got some comments, questions on the commercial fishery for the discussion for you
yeah,
guys.
let's keep going with the results.
All right. So they found number one most impactful model included um, shortening the seasons, like as would be expected, but maybe not as expected, is a full retention policy. So getting rid of all of those minimum size limits and just being able to keep everything. It drastically improved recreational catch rates over that time period by up to 650%, which I was a little shocked by. But I guess it kind of goes back to our last paper. Catch
I'm
and
not shocked.
release doesn't mean that fish is going to live. Like they showed, or they in the intro they talked about how high catch and release mortality is for this species.
But
And I just
also,
want
I
to
mean,
say,
think about this. If you're required to keep every fish that you catch, no matter what the size is, right? Your bag limit's met pretty quickly, and then you're done, you know? Whereas like if you can keep releasing fish, like how many fish are you going to catch in a day? Right? Like if you're sitting on like a spawning aggregation, you're pulling up snappers or you're just in a spot where there's a ton of them. Like I don't know if you've ever done it, Cody, but you get in some of these spots where these red snappers are at, like you're pulling in fish left and right. They might not be
Mhm.
giants, but you're pulling in fish constantly. You can probably pull in, between a few guys, 50 snappers in a day. Well, if 30 or 25% of them are dying, you know, that's a lot of fish. Whereas, like, if you kept the first two fish that you caught and you were done, then only like if 25% of 50 fish died plus the two that you kept, you're looking at like I don't know what is that like 20 fish or something that are being uh, killed. Whereas if you only kept the two each that you were allowed to keep, that's eight fish. So that's less than half the mortality. So it totally makes sense to me that
So
that full
that all
retention.
makes sense. My question was, with this policy though, is it up to the angler whether or not they keep the fish, or is it truly they catch a snapper, they got to keep the first two? Like
Yeah, I think
thinking more of
that's
that.
well,
what the full retention thing means.
yeah, and
If
it's
you
also
bring
so
it
it's
to the surface, like it's essentially already counted as dead. Like that's your fish.
and the reason that there's an effect is because there's overall well, when it had that 650% increase in the population, that's associated with a 75% reduction in fishing effort. So,
Yeah.
you're not really looking at it from a sense of like, well, there's a size limit or something like that or a bag limit. It's the overall effort is cut by 75%. And so
Yeah,
it's
Right,
I
but I
was
also think that the effort is cut by like what I just described.
yeah,
Like the
it's the
effort
way
is
that you
cut
would
by
cut
the
it.
fact that you're done. Like as soon as you
Yeah.
catch your two fish, like you're done fishing. So
I
the
was
amount
kind
of
of
time you're spending out there continuing to fish is cut, drastically shorter.
Yeah.
that all makes sense. I was picturing people, maybe not on an aggregation, pulling up a red snapper here and there, and like, all right, yeah, we're gonna keep this one, we're gonna let this one go. Like, would you get a ticket then if they were to implement this management strategy?
I
If you
think
let a red snapper go,
I think if like FWC was sitting like, a ways away with binoculars watching you and they watched
you
you
would
pull a red
technically.
snapper and release it, I think you would get a ticket in
I
that situation. And that might sound crazy, but at the same time, like I'm pretty sure Alaska does this with certain rockfish species because they're like super prone to barotrauma, and they're fishing in really deep like I don't even know what you call the areas, the type of bathymetry that they're fishing in. They're not fjords, but they kind of look like it. They're fishing in super deep water. They're pulling up these rockfish, and they're dead. Like as soon as they come up, they're dead. Like you can let them go. They might swim, but they're done. And so, yeah, they've implemented some rules there that like once you bring them up, they're that's your fish. Um, So it's not that crazy to think that that would be the rule. I'm sure a lot of people would have a problem with it, but I definitely understand why it would be effective.
Hmm.
So I'll just say I don't think it's that they're going to be looking to see if you're catching them and releasing them, because I mean that's impossible, right? You're always
Yeah.
going to have bycatch. What they're looking at in these cases, that the two management actions were temporal changes in seasons and spatial changes in seasons. So what that means is you're either going to have shorter seasons. I mean, I wasn't really sure how you could have shorter than 2 days, but that's where they're looking at effort
One
based
day.
on like 75% shorter of 2 days. That's less than half a day or less than one day.
I
Anyways,
think that's for
um,
federal
You
though.
only get 6 hours in each of those 2 days.
well, so what I was getting at though is they're looking at overall effort. So the temporal one, it's kind of hard to figure out. Maybe that, like you said, it used to be 2 weeks, so maybe it's 75%, and that's the most that they did. Right, it was 75%. 25% would be less than that. But then the other thing that they were looking at was the spatial component of it. So you reduce the effort by basically ending or removing the season for these locations. So then, yeah, if you go out there and you're targeting snapper, yeah, you're going to get a ticket for that because you can't do it in that region. But the other thing, I know we're kind of getting into discussion now, but
Yeah.
you guys,
Can I
Okay.
finish up the?
go ahead, go
Okay.
ahead.
All right. I'll go quick and stop getting distracted. Um, sorry. So season length change did matter. Longer seasons increased catch rates, as you expect, hurt the stock. Shorter seasons meant recovery, but fewer fishing days. Um, Gear changes alone weren't really found to be that effective. Um, that's those like output kind of controls. Once you catch a fish, what happens? What can they manage? Rather than trying to reduce effort and like amount of time fishing. And then finally, they found where anglers are fishing actually matters, and with those spatial closures, especially for the middle zone, where a lot of the fish and the anglers were concentrated or are concentrated. So reducing the amount of pressure and effort in that middle zone, like Georgia to North Florida, I think is that zone.
Yeah. Did you see what percentage of the snapper abundance is in that zone based on the first table in the figure?
No, I didn't catch that.
So the middle near shore. Well, I'll start with middle offshore. Middle offshore accounts for 16% of the snapper population among all six of the zones. So you have
Oh, yeah.
16% there. The middle near shore is an additional 77%. You put those two things together, I think that's 93%, if my math is right. 93% of snapper are in that middle zone. No other zone had more than 3% abundance. And so that's where I think, yeah, obviously, if you cut down stocking and or not cut down fishing in that middle
And
zone,
93%
Mhm.
of the
yeah,
population.
you're going to have an increase.
I mean, I don't
Um,
know. Like, it's kind of starting to sound to me like all these options are like not even really realistic.
well, I wouldn't say that,
The
because to me, the
fisheries.
one that's the most realistic is the descenders. You're
Yeah.
already requiring the people to have them on your boat. It's if you just use the thing, you're going to have an increase in survival rates, and you're going to have more fish, and it might not be as effective as the reduced um, fishing
Yeah.
pressure, like as the reduced seasons or the reductions in the locations that you're actually fishing these for these fish, or where you're actually fishing. But I think they're just putting that in there as like a comparison. I
Yeah.
doubt they're gonna have a management suggestion to close snapper fishing in
93%
that
of the
central
population.
region. Like one, that's just gonna tick off a bunch of people. But
People
two,
lose
you're
their
probably gonna lose a lot of license sales, and those license sales are critical for conservation.
mind. Yeah.
So to me, like my
I,
big takeaway
I
from
think
this
you're right,
paper is
though.
just cut
I,
down mortality.
I really feel like they need to change like the legislature and like the rules around these um, these release devices, these descenders, because like clearly people aren't using them, and I think just requiring people to have them on their boat when they're targeting these species isn't enough. Like I think it needs to be like if you're going out of the inlet, like if you're going, you know, outside of the bay, and you have a fishing rod on your boat, you have to have one. You
Yeah,
know, and that way, like anytime an FWC officer pulls over a boat, that's fishing, show me your descender,
yeah.
and that's such an easy thing to enforce. And I think the way that it is right now, it's just really hard for them to enforce anything because all you have to do is say like, no, we weren't targeting those species.
But even then, you're enforcing having it, but you're not enforcing using it. And to me, the biggest part of this is education. That's why I'm getting a little bit passionate about this, is because
Yeah, no, I hear you. I hear you. But I think a lot of people don't have them. I think having it is step one.
yeah, yeah,
Um, so
having it, knowing how to use it. I don't know if these states have educational programs that just demonstrate to anglers how to use these things. And even, if you could
I mean,
have a
it's
state,
pretty damn easy to use. Like, typically it's like clip it on their lip and send them to the bottom, and then when the weight hits the bottom, it releases them.
yeah.
Um,
Still though, I mean, have Florida, what is it, Fish and Wildlife Commission that you guys have there?
mhm.
Have like an education day where give
Well,
out free descenders. Get people involved with it, and then get them knowing how to use it. And that you got to have the people want to use it, otherwise
I
it's
don't
not
know
going
if
to
we
happen
can give
effectively.
them out for free because they're not the cheapest thing in the world.
Yeah, they're not
Well,
I
that's the
mean,
thing. Like,
they're
big
not expensive though, but
stuff.
you can probably
They're
spend
like
what, 80 bucks.
$60,
Yeah.
70
So,
bucks.
all right, so you get like 20 of them. I mean, it's expensive, but
but
that's how you're going to save the fishery, in my opinion.
that said,
Yep.
like there are ways that people have made them like super cheap, like some
Yeah,
kind of like ghetto rigging, but
yeah, I've
they
seen it.
work. Like I've seen people use like a milk crate with a weight,
Yeah,
and then like you put the fish in the milk crate upside down, so you send it down, it pulls them to the bottom inside of the milk crate, and then when it gets to the bottom, they'll
you
just
just lift it up.
they'll just swim out,
Yeah,
super
That
easy.
makes enforcement that much harder, though. You like roll
Yeah.
up with
Oh yeah, I got a
a
milk crate
60.
somewhere in here.
Like, no, I don't believe that's gonna work,
Yeah, no,
sir.
I don't think that milk crate was designed to be a release device. But it's funny you mentioned the education because, during items not on the agenda today, like during the commission meeting, that was exactly my comment. I was like, I think that there's a lot of not even misinformation. I think there's just a lot of the public that like doesn't understand like how the North American model of conservation works, how science is used to like enact, um, you know, management and regulations. And I think if we figured out a way to like improve education to the public, a lot of the issues that we have in conservation like wouldn't be a thing. Like we wouldn't be fighting constantly. And this is like another prime example of like education can go a long way with this. So
Kind
I'll
of
yeah.
just
along,
mention that's coming
yeah.
back to where we started this conversation. A lot of what Sea Grant, that program in NOAA, does is education for exactly things like this. It just highlights the value of
Nice,
that program.
nice bringing it full circle.
Yeah.
Nice.
I probably should buy myself one of these sequelizers myself because I'm taking the boat down to the Keys this weekend. Um,
Yeah. When you
I
get
was
your
gonna
fishing
go fishing
license,
tarpon, but I think it'd probably be a good idea to have one on the boat just in case things get crazy.
when you get your fishing license, don't you check yes for like fishing for reef species, and then you have to go through that quick course?
Well, no, because I don't buy fishing license anymore. I have a lifetime license.
Oh, right.
It used to be like every single year I'd buy a license and it would ask these questions like, did you hunt this? Did you fish for this? Did you do that? And now it's just like, I have a lifetime license. So,
So it's
that's,
old timers like you that are killing all the red snapper.
yep, it's my fault.
All right. Can I
We
ask
didn't,
a
we didn't
question?
even we didn't even talk about all our turkey stuff that we were going to talk about, like our hunts and stuff.
I'm
But
okay with that.
I don't think we have time for that. Maybe we'll save that for another day.
Can I ask one last question that's
You
maybe
can ask as many as
controversial?
you want. At some point in time, we're going to run out of recording time, and it's just going to kick us off. But I've
Yeah,
never
we're
had that happen yet, so
58
we can keep
minutes,
going.
59 minutes.
If
Okay.
we suddenly stop talking, guys, I'm sorry. We ran out of time, but thanks for listening.
Okay, real quick, because they do talk about kind of what happened with wildlife management, where we overharvested because of commercial hunting. Like, is it not a little crazy to you still that we have commercial fishing, especially in a fishery like this that's been deemed as overfished for so long? And they talk about, maybe we could have the head boats and all these other groups reduce their effort, or apply for quotas. kind of similar, or like permits similar to our commercial harvest, um, or commercial fleets, but no, this paper doesn't talk about restrictions on the commercial landings at all. And we see that the discard mortality is high. Like, I don't know enough about the details of if they can truly keep everything that they catch as a
I'm
commercial
not
angler,
100%
or
sure on that, but I think I don't know. I don't know how much they're discarding because also keep in mind the commercial guys they're not out there outside of the season. I mean, they might be fishing for other things, but like they might not be in those areas and fishing in the same way. Those commercial snapper guys, like they're going out to the snapper grounds to catch snapper during that season, and outside of that, they're probably not spending a whole lot of time out there.
yeah, they're shifting their efforts for another fishery, I'd imagine. But those bandit reels, like the vertical long lines, they'll have, I don't know what the restrictions are, but they can have dozens of hooks on those
Yeah,
at one time, and then they crank those fish up as fast as they can. So of course they're going to have barotrauma, but
super rare.
but the issue is the recreational anglers. I get there's um, more recreational anglers, larger effort going on there, and there's less educated folks probably generally. But like, I don't know, could we make the head boats more of the commercial fishery, and like they'd have people there sorting through, and you could sell your fish, kind of like a hybrid of maybe what some of our
Like
hunting
like
regulations would
you
be,
go out on a boat, and when you catch a red snapper, they're like, you can keep it or you can.
or
I
but like
don't know. I mean, I don't know how realistic that is, but like,
but with
uh,
like alligators, you're allowed to do that, right?
but again, like I think one of the really like the biggest thing here, it's not when people are out there targeting these fish, it's a lot of this bycatch, a lot of the discard mortality is happening when they're not targeting the fish.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because they talked about that they talked about that in the paper too. That like shorter season leads to higher discard mortality, and increasing size limit increases discard mortality. Like
Hmm.
all these when you limit the amount of time that you're actually allowed to catch these fish, that doesn't mean that you're not going to catch them because you're still out there trying to catch grouper and all these things. So you're going to catch these fish and try and release them, and they're a lot of them are going to die. So something that they have talked about is like trying to make the seasons sort of coincide, so that like groupers, like that the bottom fish, like the reef fishing seasons are just like all at the same time, so that people aren't even out there outside of the season that you're allowed to keep them. And they didn't talk about that in this paper, but I have heard people sort of talk about that strategy in the past. In fact, they talked about it today. I don't remember the details of it, but one of the regulation changes they were talking about was having overlap between one of the grouper species and snapper, so that it would reduce discard mortality because you're fishing the same way, in the same areas for both of them. And I think that's a potentially a really good approach that they didn't really talk about.
That
Um,
makes a lot of sense.
yeah,
Or you implement better or more selective fishing techniques like spearfishing.
I was thinking that too. I was thinking that as well. Like, what if you made it like you can only get red snapper by spear? But you still run into the problem of like people are fishing for other things. They're still going to catch red snappers
Mm-hmm.
unintentionally, and those red snappers are still going to die. So I really feel like sort of the best approach, which they didn't talk about here, which is a shame, is like making those instead of it being like it's snapper season, it's grouper season. Like it's just like nope, it's reef fish season. You know,
Hmm.
Well,
like bottom
they
fish season.
they kind of do talk about that, just not directly, because they talk about reductions like to the whole fishery, like closing the whole fishery. So that was part of that temporal component where you have just parts of the year where there's just no fishing, and the spatial component too is you just have regions where the whole fishery gets closed,
Oh
and
yeah, I
so
guess so.
it's, but that's
But
something where,
does that include all the other like bottom fishing? Like, so I guess what I'm saying is like, so I think about Holland, right? Like I grew up in the Netherlands, and like one of the things there's like during the hot summertime, like you're not allowed to fish for predatory fish. You're not allowed to fish for pike, perch, like all those things. And the way they regulate that is like you're not allowed to use the type of you're not allowed to use like fish bait. You're not even allowed to use live bait over there, which is insane. But you're not allowed to have dead bait, and you're not allowed to have lures larger than like a fly. You're allowed to use a fly that's like this big, but you can't have like spinners, you can't have plugs or any of that stuff. Any of the stuff that you would typically use to target a predatory fish. So
Mhm.
like, what if you had something like that where you were just like, you're not allowed to use weights, or like you can't use weights larger than 1 ounce. You
So
know,
like I keep coming
would that
back to
be crazy?
practicality and like as anglers, like yes, that could work, but you're going to tick off all the angling community. Same thing
I
with like
know, but at the same time, if we don't, then like it kind of sounds like we're likely to lose this fishery.
unless you use your descenders.
But that wasn't like 100%. Like
It still
what was
increased
the
the
reduction?
population after
What was
100
the
years.
reduction in mortality? I forget. What was the reduction in mortality when using the descenders?
You could have a 50% reduction in discard mortality was the upper
Okay,
estimate for what they
yeah.
were thinking, which led to a 20% increase in catch rates and landings.
So that's basically going from like 25 to 12.5%. You know, I mean, yeah, it's great, but I don't know. I kind of wonder if it's enough.
So based on their model, it would allow the population to increase.
All right, we have our answer.
That's
That's
what I'm
It's your
saying. Just
You know
descending
what?
values.
Next commission meeting, I'm gonna go up there and be like, Matt says that we have to do this because it's gonna fix the fishery.
Make
start
it
using
part
the
of
crate
your
descenders. Milk
What?
crate descend.
mandatory
Start
gear.
doing the milk crate descenders.
Well, but again, it comes down to this: like, how do you enforce that? It's hard to enforce. Where it is very
Well,
easy to enforce.
I
Like,
think
you
if you
can't go
get
out there.
enough people in support of it, you don't necessarily need to enforce it. You have the people want to do it on their own. I
Yeah,
think
you're right. You're right.
if and also like you're right, like a milk crate descender is not going to be your, you know, optimal
It's probably not
descent.
gonna
Well,
work
I don't
as
know,
well
maybe it is an optimal, but like it's not going to be like as official, but it still works. And I think
Yeah,
to be able to have that kind of cheaper alternative that can still increase your survival rates, that's better than nothing.
yeah.
And, so like if I
Hundred.
were with the state management agencies, with those educational programs, I would try to also show these DIY descenders that people can make, for real
Yeah.
cheap. Nice thing about the milk crate one too, if you've got a boat and you need some extra seats when you're not fishing or when you don't have a fish on, you got another
There you
seat.
go. Works
Um,
for fishing. Works for duck hunting.
Yeah. So, I think it's just something where you really just need to get increasing community involvement. And you don't need to do that by forcing it. When you do it by forcing it, people aren't going to do it. That's what's going
Yeah.
on now. Right now, you have to do it. They're currently trying to enforce it. No one's doing it because no one really cares to the point that they'd want to do it. But if you start educating folks and you demonstrate, like you don't have to have all these crazy reductions in your fishing, season. You don't have to have these changes to the tools, the gear that you're using, as long as you just use the gear that you currently have to use, that you currently are supposed to be using,
Yeah.
that keep these fish alive. You can still have the same fishing season. You can still have the same lures and everything that you want to use. Just let the fish live after you release it.
Yeah. I don't think that's asking too much.
Or just get rid of minimum sizes and keep the first two fish that you catch.
Yeah, but I mean that's you're having a 75%
And,
reduction in
and reduce
angling effort.
75% of the time that you can fish.
Yeah, good luck with that one.
Did they look at the full retention by itself? Did they look at that? I don't remember.
I don't remember.
They
I
looked
can
at
look.
so many different things. It's like
Yeah.
hard to.
They tried to break them up as much. Yeah.
Um, I don't know if
I don't think they did. Like I don't remember them talking about that.
Well, I don't know if that would make any sense
Why
because
not?
without a reduction in effort, that's just saying we're just going to kill everything that you catch.
No, because once you're tagged out, you're tagged out.
That's the reduction in effort.
Right. So I wonder if when they said the 75% reduction in effort, the 75 reduction in effort was caused by the full retention.
Yeah, I mean, imagine it's something like that.
Yeah.
Well, they have Look at Model 9. That's all effort reduced by 75% on its own.
Yeah, so they have that,
But then
which,
Model 13 is the one
yeah,
with fleet effort reduction by 75 and the full retention. That was really impactful.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't see a just full retention on its own.
Yeah, but I guess like what we're saying is like the full retention might would probably lead to a reduction in effort.
yeah,
Yeah.
it would have
Yeah, I
to.
think that's the whole. Yeah.
Otherwise, you're just going to say, yeah, keep whatever you want.
Yeah, right. Yeah, otherwise it's like yeah, when you get your two, you're done, but you can just keep fishing and keep some more.
Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Um,
All right.
well, I would ask the typical question we ask at the end of like, what would you do differently? But I think it's pretty clear. It's use a descender. You know,
Yeah.
Spearfish.
spearfish. Yeah, spearfish.
Yeah.
Hey, I mean, if all you do is spearfish and everybody only spearfishes and that's the only thing you ever do and you never use hook and line, you never have to worry about discard mortalities, except when you shoot a fish that's not
Hmm.
big enough.
But yeah, people hate on the Spearos. But there are some better practices that come around with spearfishing.
Spear fishermen and fly fishermen, jeez.
Hey, you're going spearfishing this weekend.
I
Are you
know,
not?
right? I'm kidding.
Next time I'm down in Florida, I want to go spearfishing with you guys.
Yeah, come on down, man. All right. Anyway, we should probably wrap it up because we are over time. So thanks everybody for listening. Hopefully you enjoyed this one. I have no idea what we're going to talk about in the next episode, but make sure that you follow, subscribe, do all that good stuff, um, and you'll find out in about 2 weeks. So yeah, peace out.
Thanks for listening.
Thank you.